Revenue and Taxation.
Section 173. Officer receiving profit on public funds guilty of felony. The receiving, directly or indirectly, by any officer of the Commonwealth, or of any county, city or town, or member or officer of the General Assembly, of any interest, profit, or perquisites arising from the use or loan of public funds in his hands, or monies to be raised through his agency for state, city, town, district, or county purposes shall be deemed a felony. Said offense shall be punished as may be prescribed by law, a part of which punishment shall be disqualification to hold office. Supporters of this section argued that it would remedy a widespread evil, but its detractors contended that it did not properly belong in a constitution, and that the problem should be left to the General Assembly to deal with in the form of legislation. The General Assembly has described a violation of this section as a Class D felony that disqualifies the offender from ever again holding public office and subjects him or her to a prison term of from 1 to 5 years. The Kentucky Court of Appeals has ruled that Section 173 prohibits a jailer from operating a commissary for profit in the county detention center, in Buchagnani v. Lexington Fayette Urban County Government, 1982. The Attorney General has issued several opinions, one of which declares that Section 173 prohibits a governor from using his or her office for pecuniary gain. The Attorney General issued this opinion in response to an inquiry by the General Counsel of Wilkinson Enterprises Incorporated, a firm primarily owned by Wallace Wilkinson, who was then the Democratic candidate for governor and was soon thereafter elected to that post. The opinion suggested that in order to avoid a possible conflict of interest and a charge of using his office for pecuniary gain, if elected governor, Wilkinson should take a number of steps, including selling a hotel located in the state capital and never allowing any of his businesses to contract with the state government except on a competitive bidding basis. Steps that Wilkinson did implement or adhere to while governor.
Section 174. Property to be taxed according to value, whether corporate or individual, income, license, and franchise taxes. All property, whether owned by natural persons or corporations, shall be taxed in proportion to its value, unless exempted by this Constitution, and all corporate property shall pay the same rate of taxation paid by individual property. Nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to prevent the General Assembly from providing for taxation based on income, licenses, or franchises. This section ensures that all property taxes will be ad valorem, that is, based upon the value of the property. Furthermore, corporations, which many critics contended had not paid enough in taxes, must pay taxes at the same rate as individuals. Believing that the General Assembly should be able to derive tax revenue from sources other than property, the framers of the current Constitution authorized the legislature to tax income and franchises as well as to impose license taxes, although some delegates argued that taxes on income and franchises were in fact taxes on property. The delegates well understood the potential of the income tax, and one went so far as to endorse the tax as an excellent way to curtail what he perceived to be the inordinate political power of the very wealthy. The Kentucky judiciary has held that Section 174 authorizes the General Assembly to impose a tax on the franchise of a corporation, in Henderson Bridge Company v. Commonwealth, 1895. That Section 174 authorizes the imposition of an income tax as well as a franchise tax on a corporation, in Reynolds Metal Company v. Martin, 1937. And that a tax on dogs to establish a fund to remunerate sheepowners for sheep killed by dogs is a police regulation and not a revenue measure, and therefore need not be proportioned according to the value of the respective dogs, in McGlone v. Womack, 1908. The judiciary has also ruled that while banks are not required to pay taxes on money deposited by their customers, in Commonwealth v. Bank of Commerce, 1904, state banks, but not national banks, are required to pay a municipal license tax, in City of Shelbyville v. Citizens Bank of Shelbyville, 1938. The U.S. Supreme Court held invalid under Sections 174 and 171 an assessment of the intangible property of a railroad company at 75% of its actual value in light of the fact that the assessment of the intangible property of individuals was no more than 60% of its actual value, in Green v. Louisville Interurban Railroad Company, 1917.
Section 175. Power to tax property not to be surrendered. The power to tax property shall not be surrendered or suspended by any contract or grant to which the Commonwealth shall be a party. This section was especially intended to prevent corporations from exacting tax immunities from the Commonwealth by way of their corporate charters and other contracts, as they had sometimes done during the latter part of the 19th century. The Kentucky judiciary has held that Section 175 means that the Commonwealth shall not renounce for any purpose its power to tax property located on land over which it retains sovereignty. However, it may not tax property used on land ceded to the federal government for a military base. In Hardin County Board of Supervisors versus Kentucky Limousines, 1956, and bonds issued for municipal housing may be exempted from taxation without violating Section 175, in Webster versus Frankfurt Housing Commission, 1943.
Section 176. Commonwealth not to assume debt of county or city, exception. The Commonwealth shall not assume the debt of any county, municipal corporation or political subdivision of the state, unless such debt shall have been contracted to defend itself in time of war, to repel invasion or to suppress insurrection. The framers of the current Constitution inserted this section to prohibit the Commonwealth from assuming the debts of those counties that had contracted them in large amounts in order to invest in railroads that were never built. These counties were left with huge amounts of indebtedness, which they were unable to pay off. The delegates rejected proposed amendments to Section 176 that would have permitted the Commonwealth to secure the debts of the most beleaguered counties, Carter, Greene, and Muhlenberg. The Kentucky Court of Appeals has ruled that a contract between the State Highway Commission and a town, providing that the commission should pay half the cost of a street running through the town, did not violate Section 176. In Highway Commission v. Board of Councilmen, 1932. But the payment by the Commonwealth of the premiums on a sheriff's county revenue bond does violate Section 176, in Miller v. Sturgill, 1947.
Section 177. Commonwealth not to lend credit, nor become stockholder in corporation, nor build railroad or highway. The credit of the Commonwealth shall not be given, pledged or loaned to any individual, company, corporation or association, municipality, or political subdivision of the state. Nor shall the Commonwealth become an owner or stockholder in, nor make donation to, any company, association or corporation. Nor shall the Commonwealth construct a railroad or other highway. During the first half of the 19th century, the Commonwealth invested a significant amount of money in turnpikes and other transportation ventures, not all of which proved to be successful. Partly as a way to largely eliminate such investments, the Third Constitution prohibited the Commonwealth from giving or loaning its credit in aid of any person, association, municipality, or corporation. The framers of the current Constitution additionally forbade the Commonwealth from owning all or any part of any company, association, or corporation, donating to such entities, or building a railroad or highway. They inserted the latter prohibition as a response to the experience of Cincinnati when it built a railroad to Chattanooga, Tennessee, an enterprise that was completed in 1880, cost nearly 3 times as much as anticipated, and initially was barely successful financially. Section 157A of the Constitution, which was ratified by the voters in 1909, authorizes the Commonwealth to pledge or loan its credit to any county for public road purposes, thus modifying the impact of Section 177 and validating a state tax imposed to aid counties in the building of highways, in Mitchell v. Knox County Fiscal Court, 1915. The Kentucky Supreme Court upheld legislation authorizing the state to sell revenue bonds to finance a private industrial development as an incentive for Toyota Motor Corporation to build an assembly plant in Scott County, concluding that the fact that the corporation would benefit from indebtedness that would be incurred by the Commonwealth did not amount to a violation of Section 177. Hayes v. State Property and Buildings Commission, 1987. Similarly, the Commonwealth did not violate Section 177 when it purchased the stock of a private toll bridge company for the purpose of dissolving the corporation and allowing the public to use the bridge free of charge, in Chandler v. Wise, 1937. However, in the opinion of the Attorney General, a county violates Section 177 when it accepts preferred stock in a private firm in place of a debt owed to the county by that firm.
Section 178. Law for borrowing money to specify purpose for which a loan money may be used. All laws authorizing the borrowing of money by and on behalf of the Commonwealth, county or other political subdivision of the state, shall specify the purpose for which the money is to be used, and the money so borrowed shall be used for no other purpose. The delegates to the Constitutional Convention who wrote this provision did not discuss its history, but its purpose seems clearly to be to prevent governments from using borrowed money for purposes other than what it was intended to achieve. The Kentucky Court of Appeals has ruled that where a city used the proceeds of a bond issue as specified to build a municipal electric light plant, the city did not violate this section because there was a possibility that when constructed the plant would not satisfy the needs of the city, in Kentucky Utilities Company v. City of Paris, 1934. Nor does a city violate Section 178 when it specifies in an ordinance more than one use for money to be raised by the sale of municipal bonds, in Reg v. City of Louisville, 1966.
Section 179. Political subdivision not to become stockholder in corporation, or appropriate money or lend credit to any person, except for roads or state capital. The General Assembly shall not authorize any county, or subdivision thereof, city, town or incorporated district, to become a stockholder in any company, association or corporation, or to obtain or appropriate money for, or to loan its credit to, any corporation, association or individual, except for the purpose of constructing or maintaining bridges, turnpike roads, or gravel roads. Provided, if any municipal corporation shall offer to the Commonwealth any property or money for locating or building a capital, and the Commonwealth accepts such offer, the corporation may comply with the offer. The framers of the current Constitution added this section to prohibit any further investment by local government, especially the counties, in railroads. Many counties had so invested, especially during the period of the Third Constitution, 1851 to 1891, and several had in effect bankrupted themselves in the process, having accumulated vast amounts of indebtedness to support failed railroad schemes. The delegates created an exception to the prohibition to permit counties, particularly economically poorer ones, to invest in private road building companies as a way to improve their systems of transportation and, eventually, their economies. The final clause about a city offering property or money to build a capital forms a part of the controversy about moving the capital from Frankfort to either Lexington or Louisville. The delegates from these cities having lobbied hard in the convention to secure such a change, according to their respective interests. A majority rejected an amendment to Section 255, which deals directly with the location of the capital, that would have mandated a statewide referendum on the location of the capital and instead provided that the capital would remain in Frankfort unless two-thirds of both houses of the General Assembly, at its first session following the adoption of the new Constitution, should vote to change the location. The final clause of Section 179 implicitly authorized Lexington, Louisville, and any other municipal corporation to offer property and money to build a new capital as a way of trying to convince two-thirds of both houses to vote to change the location. Although the General Assembly approved a resolution exploring the possibility of a capital relocation, in the end it did not authorize such a move. Shortly after the adoption of the Constitution, the Kentucky Court of Appeals held that Section 179 did not prohibit the General Assembly from authorizing a county to purchase a private turnpike company, a decision that validated the conversion of Kentucky's private turnpikes into public roads, in Maysville and Louisville Turnpike Company v. Wiggins, 1898. The court also ruled that Section 179 invalidated a county's subscription to a stock in a railroad, even though the subscription was authorized by the General Assembly prior to the adoption of the Constitution, in Whitney v. Kentucky Midland Railway Company, 1901, and the appropriation of funds by a city to supplement the salaries of teachers in an independent school district whose boundaries were the same as those of the city. In Corbin Board of Education v. City of Corbin, 1946. However, a state-funded pension awarded to a public school teacher does not violate Section 179, in Louisville Board of Education v. City of Louisville, 1941. The revenue bond has proved to be a successful way to avoid the strictures of this section, as it has for other constitutional limitations on state and local indebtedness. For example, the Court of Appeals has held that the issuance of revenue bonds to finance a public project to be owned by a municipality and rented by a private corporation does not represent a lending of credit to a corporation in violation of Section 179, in Baird v. City of Adairville, 1968. Similarly, the court held that a city did not violate Section 179 when it purchased, via the local Chamber of Commerce, 1/2 interest in a shoe factory property to enable the shoe company to build a modern manufacturing establishment, in Ezell v. City of Paducah, 1969.
Section 180. Act or ordinance levying any tax must specify purpose for which a loan money may be used. Every act enacted by the General Assembly, and every ordinance and resolution passed by any county, city, town or municipal board or local legislative body, levying a tax, shall specify distinctly the purpose for which said tax is levied, and no tax levied and collected for one purpose shall ever be devoted to another purpose. In 1996, the voters approved an amendment to this section that deleted language that empowered the General Assembly to authorize counties, cities or towns to levy a poll tax not exceeding $1.50 per head. The amendment abolished the poll tax, once used by some states, to deny African Americans the right to vote. The 24th Amendment to the Federal Constitution, ratified in 1964, prohibits the payment of a poll tax as a condition to voting in federal elections, and the U.S. Supreme Court has held unconstitutional the requirement to pay such a tax to participate in state and local elections, in Harper v. Virginia Board of Elections, 1966. During the period of the Third Constitution, 27 of 209 municipal charters known to have been in existence required payment of a poll tax as a condition to vote in municipal elections, a practice upheld by the Kentucky Court of Appeals, in Buckner v. Gordon, 1884. The voter registration statute of 1892 validated the poll tax provisions of those municipal charters. In 1907, voters rejected a proposed amendment to the Kentucky Constitution that would have made the payment of all state, county, municipal, district, and school taxes a prerequisite to voting in all but federal elections. In 1974, the General Assembly repealed the statute that authorized counties, cities, and school districts to levy a poll tax. While all of the discussion at the Constitutional Convention about Section 180 concerned the question of the fairness of the poll tax and none concerned the reasons for requiring tax laws to state the purpose of the tax and expenditures of taxes to be for their intended purpose. The reasons seem obvious. To prevent taxing bodies from taxing without explaining why and from spending tax dollars for objectives other than those proclaimed in the laws authorizing the taxes. Although the Kentucky judiciary has consistently invalidated tax levies that fail to specify their purpose, the courts tolerate the most general descriptions of such purposes. Thus, taxes levied to defray the current and necessary expenses of the county, in Poole v. Slayton, 1908, and state taxes levied for the general fund and used to make payment on park bonds, in Walton v. Carter, 1960, have been held to satisfy the requirement of Section 180. However, revenues raised for one purpose may not be used for another, and therefore funds specified for use in the construction of a sewer system may not be used to compensate for injuries caused by the alleged negligence of a contractor hired to construct the sewer system, in T.B. Jones Company v. Faro Concrete Construction Company, 1913.
Section 181. General Assembly may not levy tax for political subdivision, but may confer power, license and excise taxes, city taxes in lieu of ad valorem taxes. The General Assembly shall not impose taxes for the purposes of any county, city, town or other municipal corporation, but may, by general laws, confer on the proper authorities thereof, respectively, the power to assess and collect such taxes. The General Assembly may, by general laws only, provide for the payment of license fees on franchises, stock used for breeding purposes, the various trades, occupations and professions, or a special or excise tax. And may, by general laws, delegate the power to counties, towns, cities and other municipal corporations, to impose and collect license fees on stock used for breeding purposes. On franchises, trades, occupations and professions. And the General Assembly may, by general laws only, authorize cities or towns of any class to provide for taxation for municipal purposes on personal property, tangible and intangible, based on income, licenses or franchises, in lieu of an ad valorem tax thereon. Provided, cities of the first class shall not be authorized to omit the imposition of an ad valorem tax on such property of any steam railroad, street railway, ferry, bridge, gas, water, heating, telephone, telegraph, electric light or electric power company. Section 181 originally prohibited the General Assembly from imposing taxes for the purposes of local government. There was no meaningful discussion of this section in the convention debates, but the Kentucky Court of Appeals declared that one of the purposes of Section 181 was to prohibit the General Assembly, through its taxing power, from evading by indirection the limits on the tax rates of cities and counties imposed by Section 157, in Board of Trustees of Policemen's and Firemen's Retirement Fund of the City of Paducah versus City of Paducah, 1960. City officials complained that the necessity of imposing ad valorem taxes on the personal property of businesses discouraged companies from locating in Kentucky. They also argued that they needed expanded taxing powers to meet the financial needs of their communities. In 1895, the Court of Appeals ruled that Section 181, together with Sections 171 and 174, did not authorize a city, Louisville, to substitute a license tax for an ad valorem tax on personal property, in Levi versus City of Louisville. As the result of this decision, Louisville business organizations began lobbying for an amendment to Section 181 that would authorize such a tax, which would impose a lesser burden than an ad valorem tax. The General Assembly responded to these complaints by authorizing an amendment to Section 181 that enlarged municipal taxing authority, including the right to impose a license tax on the personal property of business. However, voters rejected the amendment. In 1902, the General Assembly proposed an amendment that empowered it to authorize cities and towns to impose income, license, or franchise taxes in lieu of ad valorem property taxes as a way of relieving the financial distress of municipalities and providing greater taxing flexibility. In 1903, the voters ratified this amendment. In 1904, the General Assembly enacted a statute that enlarged municipal taxing authority pursuant to Section 181 as amended.
Section 182. Railroad taxes, how assessed and collected. Nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to prevent the General Assembly from providing by law how railroads and railroad property shall be assessed and how taxes thereon shall be collected. And until otherwise provided, the present law on said subject shall remain in force. William Goebel, the most formidable critic of railroads at the Constitutional Convention, proposed this section because he feared that the Section 172 method of assessment of taxable property at fair cash value estimated at the price it would bring at a fair voluntary sale would result in lower assessments for railroads. He argued that in Kentucky railroads were never sold voluntarily, but at forced judicial sales that produced severely discounted prices, and thus railroads could argue that the reality of the marketplace for their property should mean lower tax assessments. The last time this section was litigated was in 1917, when the U.S. Supreme Court held that Section 182 relates only to the mode of assessment and collection and does not authorize a departure from the uniformity in valuation and rate required by Sections 171 and 174, Green v. Louisville and Interurban Railroad Company, 1917. The Kentucky Court of Appeals held that Section 182 empowered the General Assembly to devise a tax assessment method for railroads that differed from that for other types of property, in Commonwealth v. Southern Pacific Company, 1912. Thank you for viewing this history of the Kentucky Constitution. For more information, please see the following references. Citizen's Guide to the Kentucky Constitution by the Legislative Research Commission, available online. Or the book The Kentucky State Constitution, by Robert M. Ireland, Oxford University Press.